I've been binge watching every single one of the videos on your channel, every last one of them, waiting to see if there was a story that resembled my own. There wasn't. So that's why I'm going to share my story, because if it didn't happen, I would think it came straight out of a horror movie. I guess it might start out like many stories do, but the outcome and the realizations that came along the way are nothing like any of the other stories that people have shared. So I think by me sharing this, it's just one more thing that guys can look out for if they want to retire in the Philippines. Do you want to hear about how I even decided to go to the Philippines? I guess you probably don't want to. That's irrelevant. But I would like to say that when I got to the age of 60 and there was no end in sight when it came to working, I started looking for alternatives. I buried myself into YouTube. This was during COVID, and I'd watched YouTubers who had found themselves in the Philippines when everything was locked down, and I used to envy them, wishing that it was me that was there. I'd never been to the Philippines. It had never even been on my radar until I started watching those videos. But as COVID progressed, all I thought about was going there, and that already worked out that I would be able to retire there as soon as they opened up. I started doing online dating. I messaged lots of girls, and I was overwhelmed about how many of them actually responded to me. It felt like I was fighting them off. I was the one in charge, and throughout COVID, I developed 4 or 5 online romances. But over time, I singled out one girl that seemed to tick all the boxes. She was from the island of Cebu, and I guess it's just another typical story of being from a poor family, not having any money, and seeking somebody who was able to get married to her and help her improve her life. There was no indication of having to improve the life of her family, but I did know that this might become a reality, and it was something I was prepared for. I had done the research to know that family in the Philippines was very important, and if someone in the family is poor, then someone who's not is going to help them. It's as simple as that, as much as in the West we're not used to it. She never asked me to send any money, and I told her as soon as the country opened, I was going to go. And then we talked about all kinds of things, doing video calls with each other, speaking at all hours of the day. And when the country did open, I had already decided to go. I'd arranged everything so that I could just leave. I quit my job during COVID because I understood that I had enough money to live in the Philippines. It wouldn't be a fortune, but it would be enough to give me and any partner that I got with a seriously good life. Or so I thought. I sold my house and my car, and even some of the collectibles that I'd saved over the years, and that gave me an amount of money to be able to finally start living. I didn't have much in terms of needing an income. I thought I had enough money to see me until I didn't need money anymore, and I even expected that there would be money left over. Going to the Philippines after never being before, I was quite apprehensive because I didn't know what it was going to be like when I got there. I was pleasantly surprised when I arrived in Manila. I was going to be meeting this girl that I'd been speaking to down in Cebu about a week later, but as soon as I arrived in Manila, I felt right at home, and I did lots of the things that I wanted to do and that I thought about when I wasn't there. Travelling to all the places like Makati, BGC, and going to look at the famous park which was quite close to the American Embassy. I packed a lot into a week, and I was living basically amazingly, almost straight away. But it was taking a while to get used to what the Philippines was like. To say it was different to where I came from would be to state the obvious. It wasn't just different, it was like arriving in a different world altogether, let alone a different country, and that's something that made me excited to be there. I was still speaking to this girl all the time. We were going to meet up, but there was no indication that we were going to take things seriously straight away. It's one thing to speak to someone when you're thousands and thousands of miles away. You can get the feeling of what they're like, but you really need to speak to them and see them in person for a while before you understand if they're going to be right for you. I was looking forward to meeting up with her. I was quite nervous. She was 26, I was 60. That's a big gap. She had 2 kids, which I struggled with because I knew I would have to take care of them and I'd be responsible for them. I had enough money for that, so I didn't have any issues there, but I just wanted to make sure I was doing the right thing, and I wasn't trying to run before I could walk. I had the best time in the world in the Philippines when I arrived, so I didn't need to rush into anything. But after that week in Manila and me definitely thinking like I made the right choice, I flew to Cebu. We weren't serious enough that she was meeting me at the airport, but I made my way to the hotel and sent her a message to say I was there. I planned to meet up with her the following day, but she said she was so happy I was here and asked me which hotel I was staying at. She then said she'd be there in a few hours and she couldn't wait to see me. When she arrived at the hotel, I walked down to the lobby and there she was. It felt strange to see her in person, but good at the same time, and she looked exactly like she looked in the pictures I'd seen of her and how she looked when we were speaking on the video. She seemed to look happy to see me, and she even said that I looked younger than I looked in my pictures, and that made me feel good. We left the hotel and went for a meal and started to talk. After a few hours, it was quite apparent that we were made for each other, at least I thought. The conversations were effortless, just like they were when we were speaking when I was back in the States. Everything seemed to just click together, and I arranged to meet her the following day. It was clearly important to me that I wasn't rushing. I didn't want to commit before I was sure, so I was happy to wait. I spent the rest of the day just getting acquainted to what the city of Cebu was like. I found that compared to Manila, it was just perfect. Not too busy, but still busy enough. They had everything that I was used to seeing around. Lots of the American chains I liked were there. Maybe not all of them, but there were lots. And I was starting to feel like moving to the Philippines was the best decision I'd ever made. I met up with her again the next day, this time in the evening, and we went out for a date. And we did that for the next week. It was after that week that she said she was happy that I was there and that she asked what my plans were. I'd already told her it was my plan to retire to the Philippines, and I said that I didn't know exactly where I wanted to live. But based on everything I see now, most likely that would be in Cebu. She told me she didn't really like Manila. She's only been once, she said, but she much preferred where she was from. Everything in Cebu was better, she said, and it did seem like Cebu would be the place I would want to spend my retirement. It was that evening when our relationship moved to the next step, and it was after that night that I decided that I really did like this girl and I wanted to get to know her. When we met, I found out she wasn't currently working. She said she was in between jobs, and before she met, she was living at her family's house, which was a few hours away from where we were. She said that she wanted to see how things went with me before looking for another job. We had spoken at length when I was back in the States about how it was her dream to meet someone and be a housewife, so I knew what that meant. I would be the one responsible for the finances in the relationship, and that was good with me. But because she'd been staying with a friend when we met up, and because that was going to not last much longer, she said she would need to go home. I just said, well, if you like me as much as I like you, then you can move in now. So she took her things from her friend's place and moved to my hotel room with me. I'm happy with the way things are going. My retirement in the Philippines couldn't have got off to a better start, and the girl I've been speaking to for months before I'd met, she was just like she was when we spoke, even when I wasn't there. Everything seemed to be going well. I'd arrived in the Philippines in March 2022. As soon as I could get there, I was there. And we just stayed together for 3 months, and our relationship was solidified during that time, and there was no one else I would rather spend the rest of my life with. I was sending money back to her family to help with her kids, and that was good with me. And after 3 months, it seemed like we should move out of the hotel into a more permanent place. We looked around for a few weeks and found somewhere that was great. It was incredibly cheap and it had the best views. It was only a 1-bedroom place, but it had everything we needed. And I'm just stunned that I'm living in such an amazing place and having such a different life to my old one, and the fact that I don't need to work anymore. If I was still back in the States, I would still be working a dead-end job, and I would have had to have done that for as long as I could think of. Now I was free and life was good. After we'd lived in the apartment for about 2 months or so, I would guess, that was when she said, would I like to go and meet her family? Up until then, I'd spoken to them, but I'd never seen them. They knew I was in a relationship with their daughter, and it did seem like the best thing to do would be to go and meet them. I didn't know if I should be nervous or excited when we arranged transportation to take us there. It did feel strange because I was actually older than her parents, but I knew that in the Philippines, things like that were more normal than where I was from. So I was confident that when I got there, they would be great and everything would progress, and we might even talk about marriage. I hadn't considered marriage yet, but it was always something that I thought might happen at some stage. So when we set off on the 2 hour drive all the way up to where she was from, I was excited. There is something about the Philippines that isn't like nowhere else. The natural beauty of the place is second to none, and the people are so nice. If you smile at someone, they smile back. Not like at home, if you smile at someone, they'd look at you like they wanted to hit you. It's a very different culture and a very different way of doing things. And it felt like how things used to be when I was young back in the States. A sense of community. It's vanished from where I was from, and probably from the whole country in the States, but in the Philippines, community was alive, and it's something that I was drawn to. This sense of community was on show to an even bigger degree when we finally arrived at her family's house. It was a basic house, basic concrete structure using concrete blocks, and it had a tin roof and wood that was connecting the roof to the concrete block walls. There was a hole all around the top, a big gap where the roof was, so you could see outside. The kitchen was also outside, but the setting of the house, that was what made it special. It was in a small village, about 10 minutes away from a small town, and when we got there, her family were waiting, and the first impressions were wonderful. They welcomed me to their house, introduced me to other people in the family. I saw her kids for the first time, which was quite strange because I'd never had kids and I was 60. She had 2 kids and she was 26. But in the Philippines, it's best to just go along with things like that. So we spent time with her family, and this was reinforcing my feelings that I was making the right decision by being with her. They did talk about marriage and plans for the future and where we were going to live. And I just said I was happy in Cebu, renting a place, and marriage was always a possibility. But let's play things by ear for the next few months and see how they go. We stayed there for most of the day and returned back to the city in the evening. And when we were on the way back, I remember saying to my girlfriend, and that her family was so incredible. I felt very fortunate to have met her, and just seeing where she came from and the people around her, it made me feel more connected to her. She said that she misses her kids all the time, but she is thankful to have met me. And then she started talking about the possibility of building a house close to where she was from, and then that could be our base in Cebu. I knew what went along with building a house somewhere like that. I was foreign, I couldn't own the land, but it was something I was prepared to consider. But I would have to spend at least another 6 months with her before that was a remote possibility. I did make that clear to her, and she said she understood. She said she wouldn't expect me to build a house now, and the conversation shifted to something else. We got back to Cebu, and over the next 3 months, we just lived my best 3 months. It couldn't have been better, and the more I was there, the more I wanted to stay there, and the more I was with her, the more I wanted to be with her. So I was very happy with the situation. After those 3 months, we decided to go and visit her family again. She wanted to see her kids and just let them know that we're good and things are great with the relationship. So we made it there, but that time we were going for a few days, not just one. She wanted to show me around the area where she was from and let me know what living there would be like, and if I wanted to build a house and live there myself. It was during those 2 days I was staying at her family's house, which was a bit of a struggle. They didn't really have rooms like they do in other houses. It was one big room, and everyone had their own little corner. But they made a little bedroom out of some signage that they'd found, and I had a bit of privacy inside there. My girlfriend didn't stay with me when I was staying there, and she just stayed with the rest of her family. But they were very open to giving me more than they had, even though what they had was basically nothing. It was on our final day when the talk about living there came up again. It was mentioned that her cousin had some land that she was selling, and it was in an ideal location if we wanted to build a 2-story house, and had a balcony. We could have probably seen the ocean from the balcony. We went to have a look at the land. and it did tick all the boxes of being in an incredible place. It was quite remote, and it would take work to make sure that the electric could be connected and other things like that, but it did seem to be the sort of land where you would get it, build a house, and live there, and not feel like you needed to do anything else because you're in the perfect place. Entertainment would just be enjoying your house. It felt amazing. I wasn't ready to agree anything then, but I said let's go back to Cebu and let's think about it. It only made sense to give it some careful thought, because I didn't want to rush into anything, and that was fine with my girlfriend. The land was not expensive, but it wasn't cheap either, so I didn't want to just buy it if it wasn't definitely going to be what we would do. I did think I would have enough money to buy the land and build a house, and still have enough money to last me. So we returned to Cebu and we started to think about it some more. We gave it a lot of careful thought over the next 3 months. It was always something we were talking about, but we're talking about it in a way that it's probably going to be what we will do, but let's wait. After those 3 months and things were going great, that was when we decided to get married. I said 6 months of us being together, if things are good, then we can get married. So 6 months were up, so that's what we did. We had a big party in Cebu and quite a few of her family members came. I paid for them all to stay in a hotel, and it was a great time. Then, after that, we went to Manila for a week, just to get away and really think about what we wanted to do. When we did decide that we did want to buy the land and start to build a house, that's what we wanted to do. When we were in Manila, I had to arrange some things with my embassy, so it was decided that she would return to Cebu first and go and sort out the land, and then I would come back in a week's time or however long it took for me to get this paperwork that I needed. I gave her the money for the land, which was somewhere close to $20,000, and she left and called me about 10 hours later, and she said she was already at her family's house. As her cousin was the one who was selling the land, it was quite easy to sort out. Pay the money, get the land on my wife's name, and that's what I thought happened because she said everything was done and the land was ours. She used the word ours, not mine, because we were a couple and I was happy with that. It took a bit longer than I wanted to get this documentation, but 10 days later, I was also in Cebu when we met at our rented condo. She looked so happy when she saw me. She started talking about how the land was great and we're going to start building soon. I liked the sound of that, and after I was back in Cebu for a few days, something along those lines, we actually went to buy a car. It seemed to be because we were going to be moving out into rural Philippines that a car would be very important to be able to go from place to place. We might want to go to the city when we wanted to. I didn't spend a lot on the car, but now we had one, that made everything so much easier. We arrived at the family's house, and about a week later, after everything was done in the city, everyone was happy to see us, and now they knew that we were husband and wife. They were even more welcoming than they were before. I hadn't met her cousin, whose land it was we bought, and I would later learn that she was actually living in a different part of the Philippines, but I didn't think to question anything like that. The land was transferred and everything was great. It all sounded perfect. We spent a few weeks looking for someone to build a house, and it was full steam ahead. I was ready to invest the money for the house, and I transferred the money in, and over the course of the remainder of 2022 and into early 2023, the house was built, completed, and we moved in. There was no indication that anything at all could go wrong. We're living in the house, and we'd been there for a month. It might have been longer than a month, but her kids had moved in with us, and we're living like a normal family. I got into the routine of retirement, and I'm so happy with the decision I made to move to the Philippines and build the house. I did spend a little bit more money on the house than initially planned for. I had to transfer in some more money, but at my age I had enough money to spend $1,000 a month until I was 90, and I didn't expect to live that long. The months go by, and I guess we'd been there for about 3 months when it was announced to me that her cousin was going to come back and visit from where she was working. She had a Filipino husband, and she also had a kid who was living with her parents. Her mother was the sister of my wife's mother, so it would be interesting to be introduced to some more people in the family. I didn't think anything about it, and got on with my day and the rest of the week. But one day my wife said, "We're going around to have a big family gathering, and you'll be introduced to everybody else that you haven't seen yet. There were some other people in the family who were coming back. I don't know if it was some special holiday, but lots of the family worked in different parts of the Philippines. Some in Cebu City, a few in Manila, so it was quite a big deal. We went round for the family gathering, and I was introduced to everyone that I had not been introduced to before. Everyone seemed so nice. Of course, I was also introduced to her cousin. There was no indication that anything was wrong, and that evening we returned home. Yet the following morning, her cousin came around and just said, "You haven't paid me for the land." I thought it was a simple misunderstanding. I'd already given the money to my wife, and she looked at me and said, "I've already paid her for the land." She looked quite shocked, but her cousin said, "No, you haven't." I remembered giving her the money, so either her cousin was lying or my wife was lying, and I trusted my wife because I didn't think that she would take the money to buy some land and then not pay for it. Her cousin then said, "I won't transfer the land to you if you don't give me the money." And that was the first time I found out that the land hadn't even been transferred to my wife. It was still in the name of her cousin, and she wasn't prepared to transfer it to my wife unless we paid more money. All good things have to come to an end. Up until then, I was so happy in the Philippines, happy with my decision to retire early, happy with my wife, happy with the house we built, and now I'd found out that the land we built the house on wasn't even my wife's. I thought it was. My wife tried to explain to me that she'd already sent the money and she was going to get everything sorted out when they met up. She promised me she sent the money and I believed her, but her cousin was adamant that she hadn't. We all went round to her family's house. I spoke to her mother and father, and her cousin's mother and father also came to speak, and everyone's arguing and fighting with each other, and they said, "You need to pay. It's $50,000 for the land, that's how much it's worth and you need to pay." But we'd already paid $20,000, and I'd already thought it was my wife's, so I'm starting to get angry. I'd heard of people being cheated by their wife in the Philippines, but I'd never heard about something like this. I looked at her cousin, who spoke English very well, and just said, "I'd already given my wife the money. I can't give you $50,000. I'm retired and I don't have enough money to do that. I've just spent most of my money on this house, and I've got enough to live here with my wife. How dare you try to ruin my retirement and try to steal from me?" That didn't go down well because she just said, "Your wife took the money and didn't pay for the land." My wife just said, "No, she didn't." So that went on for a long time. But the truth of it was the land still belonged to her cousin, so there was nothing we could do. I suggested to my wife we speak to the local police, but my wife said that would make things difficult with the family. And then I'm starting to think, do I really understand if my wife did what she said? Where did she get $20,000 from and now it's 50? It all didn't really make sense. We left after having that meeting and nothing was done. And now I'm starting to really worry because my retirement is on the line. Without this house, my retirement is going to be in a mess, and that's the last thing I wanted to happen. I tried to get my wife to explain to me why didn't she tell me that the land hadn't been transferred to her yet. She just said she didn't think it was a problem because it's family, and why would her family do that? I guess that made sense, yet even when you're dealing with family, you've got to be careful when you're dealing with large sums of money. I told my wife that I spent the most of my retirement savings for the house, and I've got enough for us to live there forever, but I can't spend any more money. I can't just give $50,000 to your cousin. Number one, I thought the land was $20,000, and I've already given it to you. And because also that would be 50 months of living expenses, more than 4 years. That's how much she was wanting, and there was no way I could do it. I couldn't afford it. If I did, then my retirement would be over, when it was just starting, and I was just starting to enjoy it. My wife said she would try her best to get things sorted out with her family, and I left it to her. And it's something that I'm thinking about constantly, and I'm worrying all the time for the next few weeks. Her cousin hadn't left back to work. I kept saying, "Is she going to back to work?" And my wife said, "She wants to get this sorted." And then I'm saying, "Well, if you paid, you have proof, I guess." She just said, "No, I sent her the money." Then I said, "Surely you can get a bank transfer copy to show that you sent the money. Look at your account." Then she just said, "I didn't send it with the bank, I sent it another way." That was that. She wasn't able to tell me what the other way was, and I'm starting to think, did she do what she said? About a week later, Her cousin comes around with what looks like a policeman and says, "These people have built a house on my land and they haven't paid for the land. I want them gone." "What do you mean?" I said. "I gave the money to my wife." But whatever I said made no difference. She said, "I need 50,000 for the land or you're gone." That is something that I never expected to happen. I couldn't believe that everything in my retirement was going so well. Then all of a sudden, I found out that this house that I built and the land that I bought for my wife, it appeared that I'd done it not for my wife, but for her cousin instead. I was politely told that the land is not your wife's. You have no claim on it, so you've got to leave. I was thinking it was impossible that something like this was real. How could it be real? How could this be happening to me? I thought I did the due diligence. I spent months getting to know my wife. I trusted her with my life. And now I was starting to think that she'd given $20,000 to somebody else, or she'd kept it. Did she even give it to her cousin? And why was there a discrepancy between the prices? She couldn't prove she'd sent it. I had no choice but to leave the house. I went with my wife back to Cebu, and we just sat in the car. We didn't talk all the way back. She just said her cousin had stolen the house. Then I'm thinking, has my wife stolen my money? And is this a big setup? I don't know what the truth is. I tried to get the truth out of her, and all she kept saying was, "I gave the money to my cousin and she cheated me." But then I'm thinking, are you sure? There was no receipts, nothing to show she'd sent it. Yet we had receipts saying that we paid for everything for the house. The builder gave us the receipts, so why couldn't we use that to say, well, she's got to pay us for the house? Apparently, it didn't work like that. Back in Cebu, I can't look at my wife in the same way anymore. This is my worst nightmare, and it's happened just in front of me, and most of my savings are gone. They went into a house that was meant to be for my retirement, and I was happy for her kids to move in. I was happy to help support her family. I was happy to do everything that would have made my retirement better. Yet it seemed like I'd lost the house that I'd built, and there was nothing I could do about it. I called my embassy, and they just said it's nothing to do with us, we can't help. Then I spoke to the police, and they said it's their land, and you need to sort it out between your wife and cousin. But my wife just seemed to think that there was nothing we could do about it, and we should forget it. We're in a hotel that night, and the next morning my wife says to me, "Do you want to go and look for somewhere to rent?" It was as though she completely forgot about the fact I'd spent all that money building the house, and I just said, "I want to sort this out. I want to go back and live in our house." Yet according to my wife, we should just leave it and forget about it. But that wasn't going to happen. My wife tried to convince me to just let it go, but how was I able to do that? The more I kept trying to tell her that I needed something to sort out, the more she tried to say forget it, the more angry I was with her. All I kept saying to her was, the only thing that you should be doing is trying to sort this out with your cousin. If you can't do that, then there's no point doing anything else, because I can't support you if I don't have that house to live in, because I would need to pay for somewhere else to live. Can you understand what I'm trying to say? She said she was going to go and speak to her family again, and ask her cousin if there's something we can do. I let her have the car. She said she would come back soon. She called me a few days later. That was the first time we hadn't spoke for a few days. And she just said she was so sorry, but there's nothing we can do. Her cousin won't talk to her anymore. Her family have fallen out with each other, and the land is her cousin's. She never thought someone in her family would do that. She said, "I'm going to come back and I will see you soon." So a few hours later, she was back. She just walked inside like everything was normal and we were all good. And I just had to say to her that if I can't live in that house, then I don't think we can stay together. You've ruined my life by simply not buying the land and making sure it's yours first. And as much as she tried to make me change my mind, I just felt like there was no point staying with her. The fact that she did that just made me think that I'd made the biggest mistake I'd ever made. Years of working were in that house and I couldn't live in it, and I had to accept that. We separated the same day. She was crying and saying she was sorry, and she drove back in my car, which she decided to keep. She went back to her family's house and she tried to call me a lot of times, and I just kept telling her it's over, I can't take this. Get the house back and we can talk again, but if you don't, it's over. She tried to call again, but there was nothing had changed, so I had to block her number. I didn't want anything to do with her ever again. I couldn't believe what had happened. It was the worst thing that ever happened to me, and it was all because of one stupid mistake by my wife. Or had she lied and it was her idea all along to do this? I still don't know, but I had to sit down and think, can I even stay in the Philippines? I could just about make it work. I am still in the Philippines, yet I left Cebu. I didn't want anything more to do with the island, and I found a cheap place to rent in Manila. I survive on about $1,100 a month. While that's a lot for many local Filipinos, it's still not a lot of money to have a great retirement. I've had to completely change what my retirement was meant to be. From living in a really nice house with a balcony with a view of the ocean, to living in a very small rented room in Makati. That's the life I've got for myself, and it's all because of what happened. And I think this is something that you need to understand if you want to go to the Philippines. If you're doing something with your wife, you need to make sure you understand what all the documents look like, how things work. Can you verify that the land has been put on your wife's name? As I just thought that it would have been done, as you'd expected it to have been. But it destroyed my retirement, and I'm slowly picking up the pieces, although it's not very easy to do so.